That's not fair. I had zombies too.
Yes, you did. Yes, you had zombies. But this is zombie redneck torture family, see? They're entirely separate species. Like the difference between an elephant and an elephant seal. Okay. But there's always next year.
The Cabin in the Woods, critiquing the horror industry. Who is the main villain in Cabin in the Woods? If you've ever seen Drew Goddard's 2012 cult comedy horror film, you probably remember the absurd amount of monsters that show up during its runtime. There's a zombie redneck torture family, the Tooth Fairy Girl, the Hellraiser Dude, the Merman, this Thing, and hundreds of others. But the film wasn't just a collection of random monsters for the sake of nostalgia. Cabin in the Woods sought out to answer several questions about the horror industry. Through its creatively meta screenplay, Goddard and Whedon went on to critique horror films, the industry that creates those films, and ultimately us, the horror fans. To get to the root of Cabin in the Woods' meaning, we first had to ask several questions. Who is the main villain of the story? Why do those people underground want to kill off these teenagers, and why are they so scared? Allow me to introduce you to the Ancient Ones, the presumably most feared monster in the entire film. Although they only show up for half a second in the film, the whole movie's premise exists solely to appease them. They are the ones who want to see the young punished for their youth, for blood to be spilled, and for tops to be taken off. As Hadley, one of the people in charge, puts it,
"We're not the only ones watching, Ken.
Gotta keep the customer satisfied."
But that brings up another point about the identity of this monster. Why would an all-powerful god need these specific sacrifices? Perhaps it wouldn't be such a stretch to suggest that the identity of the voyeuristic, horror trope-loving ancients is someone greater than the film itself. You, the viewer. As a meta-film, Cabin in the Woods examines horror movie tropes and ridicules the stereotypes of the genre. But at the same time, it mocks audiences' popular taste in regards to the horror genre. For example, there are the stock characters that every horror movie expects to have: the virgin, the fool, the whore, and the jock. Each character is designed to act a certain way and die at a fixed time within the film. It's what brings audiences back. After the B-rate slasher films that started this trend became popular, this became the new standard that horror films revolved around. Audiences continued to support this film, and the ancients also demand it as the terms of the sacrifice. However, the characters within Cabin in the Woods, Dana, Kurt, Holden, Marty, and Jules, do not fit these stereotypes perfectly. There is more to them that the stereotypes imply. For example, Dana, the supposed virgin, isn't even a virgin.
What's not his fault? Fucking his student or breaking up with her by email? I knew what I was getting into. Oh, please.
Kurt and Jules, the jock and the whore, are actually really smart.
Gorofsky, now this is way more interesting. Also, Bennett doesn't know it by heart, so he'll think you're insightful.
That's why those underground people had to use pheromone powder to make them all do those dumb things contrary to their character.
Safe, no matter what happens, we have to stay together.
Calm down. Watch the master work.
This isn't right.
What? What's the matter?
This isn't right. We should split up. We can cover more ground that way.
Yeah.
Therefore, it doesn't really matter to the audience what the characters are truly like. As long as the victims seem one-dimensional and look a certain way, they can fit the bill.
The hair dye.
Dumb blonde. Very artistic.
Similarly, within the film, stupidity and punishment are what the ancients crave the most. The people in the White Room emphasize that the victims have to be the ones that do something wrong in order for a monster to be summoned. The ancients want to see the characters being young, dumb, and horny. That way, they can be properly punished for their actions. Isn't that why we watch horror films in the first place? Perhaps these films are tapping into some underlying urges that we all have, that id part of ourselves that love the excessiveness of the gory horror film. Or maybe it's the one chance that we have to see our grotesque fantasies come to life outside of our imagination. Either way, horror films are an escape from the banality of everyday life. We as audience members also love to be right. We know that there's something terrifying in the dark corner, and we love that moment when the music stops and the whole scene tenses up. It's a chance to prove to ourselves that we're smarter than those bimbos on screen, and that we know we wouldn't make the dumb mistakes that they made if we were put in that same situation. How many times have you come out of a horror film and thought to yourself, man, none of that would have happened if the main character just ran a little faster? Since there's a horror film formula, we get to relive that personal moment of triumph over and over again, film after film, since we know that we'd never get into that situation in real life. But what about those people underground? If the ancients are us, the viewers, the people underground are the studios behind the horror films we love to watch. They control all aspects of the film that they are making, forcing their victims to make incredibly stupid decisions, like deciding to split up or deciding to have sex in a dark forest, and having them die in ways that are gory and sadistic. The underground people also exist only to satisfy the audience, or the ancients. At the very end of the film, a new character named the Director shows up, trying to convince Dana that killing Marty is what the ancients ultimately want. Not only is her name a giant red flag about what the underground company represents, but she is portrayed by Hollywood superstar Sigourney Weaver. Compared to the rest of the cast at the time, she is the most well-known, representing Hollywood by being cast in the film itself. By drawing all of these different connections between what the film has to say about creators, audiences, and the horror genre, The Cabin in the Woods becomes a lot more clear in what it is trying to do. At the end, when Dana and Marty sit back and wait for the world to end, Dana sighs, saying,
It's time to give someone else a chance.
it is implied that they have failed, that this is the type of movie that audiences don't want to see. The horror film formula has not been fulfilled within Cabin. The result? The ancients are angry, and a giant hand comes up from underground and destroys the Cabin universe entirely. Their franchise is over because they have failed to please us. There will be no sequels, and audiences will move on to the next horror series or remake to satisfy their voyeuristic needs. At least, that's what it was like back in 2012, the time of Cabin's release. The late 2000s and early 2010s were inundated with sequel after sequel after sequel, rehashing the same few characters that audiences have grown familiar with. In fact, the top grossing films of the time were nearly all remakes or sequels, since that was the most surefire investment for movie studios. Original films that had somehow snuck their way to the top were granted their own franchise as well. The ancient ones have spoken, and the studios didn't seem to mind repeating the sacrificial process year after year. For the most part, the type of formulaic slasher films that Cabin parodies don't do so well in the present day anymore. With the variety of horror films that are out there today, especially from the independent sector, it's kind of hard to predict what kind of films will be popular next. Even remakes of popular films back in the day have now changed with the times. At the end of October, a sequel to the classic Halloween film is slated for release, but instead of young carefree teenagers cluelessly being gutted by Michael Myers and his ever-sharp kitchen knife, though rest assured that's probably still going to be a thing, the protagonist this time around is one of the survivors of the original Carpenter film 40 years later. With no scantily clad, sex-crazed teenagers in sight, the 2018 Halloween will be an intriguing film to keep an eye on in terms of success. Will this new generation of ancient ones be satisfied with these changes? Looks like we'll just have to find out.